Newsfirst Newsline with Faraz Shaukat Ali.
And a splendid morning to you. This is Newsline, live as always from the Newsfirst studios in Dawson Street in Colombo. And this is the start of a hopefully wonderful week. And the weather's not bad, is it, this morning? And to join us this morning is the former Deputy Governor of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka, and not really to talk only about the bond, because there is life beyond the bond, like the budget and fiscal management. And to do all that is the one and only Dr. W.A. Vijayawardena. Very good morning, Doctor.
Good morning, Faraz.
And I thought better say that, because even if they say you, me, they think it's bond.
Well, of course, there is a life beyond bond, as you say.
Yes, there is, isn't there? Now, what about this designer budget? What do you think?
Yeah, in my opinion, compared to the budgets of his predecessor, Faraz, Minister Rai Karunanayake, this is an improvement on many counts.
Right.
One is that if you have listened to him, you know, he was very confident when he presented the budget, rather than just reading out the budget that had been prepared by someone else. He was very confident in what he was reading out.
Right.
Second one was he used a very minimum time period to castigate the previous administration. And also eulogized the present administration.
Right.
So that was limited only to, I have counted, only 5 minutes.
Right.
So the rest of the two and a half hour period was basically devoted for the budget.
Devoted to business.
Business, exact business. And he was very confident and professional. He never ever, even when there were some interruptions by the opposition members, he never ever got angry and tried to slander them. So it was a professional presentation, in my opinion. And also there are certain in fact deficiencies in the budget that he has prepared, which we can talk later. In my view, it's a good performance.
Good performance.
But
there are a few laughable matters.
Well, there are a number of things. Probably I think he might be able to correct them while the discussion on the debate on the budget is going on in Parliament, because there's nothing wrong in changing what the howlers that would have been presented proposed in the budget of 2018.
But one of those was, I worked out, was the debt repayment levy, DRL as I call it. DRL is a little bit silly.
Well, that is a silly thing, but of course what we have to realize is that the government, present government, is actually harping on the fact that there had been a massive mountain of debt that had been accumulated by courtesy of the previous administration, and this government has to repay it.
But this government has incurred around
They also have incurred,
because
far as the main reason is this, if you take a household, if your income is insufficient for you to meet your day-to-day expenses, you have to borrow. So what the government should do is to either to raise the income or cut down your expenditure program, or you adopt both. So what was done during the last 2-year period is they were able to gain a small gain in increase in income by about, say, 2 percentage points of the country's total output, which we call the GDP. But at the same time, the expenditure went up drastically, and as a result, the budget deficit remained even bigger than the deficit that had been attained during the previous period.
That's right.
So
I worked out that the increase under this government was about 2,700 billion, or about 2.7 trillion.
That is why. So you have to borrow.
So they had to borrow.
You have to borrow. So what should have been done is to cut down the expenditure program, so that you would be able to reduce the budget deficit, and also then your the requirement of going for additional debt, you can cut it down. But
what about selling off the family silver?
That is, of course, you can adopt that kind of a strategy for us only one time, because you can sell only one time, and once you have sold it, you are finished. But of course, if you have a very serious financial problem, you might resort to that kind of a strategy also. But it is not a permanent solution.
Yeah.
And you should
what about Dr. Vijayawardena? I go around, I see things, and these are prime real estate, for example, and it's owned by the government. Isn't it better to do a sale and lease back arrangement?
Yeah, that's why. I mean, because in Sri Lanka, for us, the biggest land owner is the government of Sri Lanka.
Yes.
Lots of land belongs to the railway department, Ceylon Transport Board, and various other government entities.
Yeah.
So as a result, if the government wants to convert the land which is lying idle right now into a financial flow that would help the government to finance its day-to-day expenditure, they could have gone for some kind of an arrangement of either selling the land or going for a leasing. Now, what I suggest is not the sale of the land, outright sale of the land. What I suggest is, as you have very correctly said, for us, you can lease it for a longer period, maybe 50 years or 90 years, longer period. It will improve the financial flow into the government. But what matters to us today is there must be some kind of a restructuring the government's expenditure program, cutting down the unnecessary expenditure that they incur on various ways, financing the ministers, maintaining a huge number of...
I'm a bit saddened that the Minister of Finance didn't deem it fit to mention the increase expenditure by both the Prime Minister and the President.
No, I mean, those are only single items for us. I mean...
So he doesn't have to mention them.
No, what we have to look at is the overall increase.
Right.
Overall increase in the total consumption expenditure of the government has been enormous.
Right.
So with that amount of increase in the expenditure, there is no any way for the government to prevent itself from borrowing further. So that is why they had to borrow another 2 trillion of funds during the last 2-year period, adding up to the total public debt of the country.
Right.
So it's a game which has been played by all the governments since independence, because at the time of independence for us, when Sri Lankan rulers got the power to rule this country,
when
from
they
the
became
British,
masters of their own destiny.
Master of their own destiny, the total public debt was just 17% of the country's GDP. Now it has gone up to near 80% today.
Right.
So over the whole post-independence period, every government that had been in power in Sri Lanka had played this game of borrowing more money, charging the previous administration for driving the country to indebtedness. But of course they themselves had played the same game. The reason is they had never ever thought of the necessity for restructuring the government expenditure program, make it more efficient, and also cutting down unnecessary expenditure, so that the destiny of the Sri Lankans has now been that we are saddled with...
But in this case, it's absolutely criminal that when they came in, so at the end, if I'm not mistaken, these figures, at the end of 2014, December 2014, the total in terms of bonds and bills and so on, the borrowings, was about 4,000 billion or 4 trillion. Now, on that basis, when Arjuna Mahendran, the governor, decided to arbitrarily raise the interest rates because he had no authority from the monetary board, and when he borrowed at these very high rates and shoved the interest rate upwards by around 3 percentage points, each 1% on the 4,000 billion turned out to be 40 billion.
No, it only applies to the new borrowings for us, not to the debt stock that the government had inherited from the previous administration. But the additional cost on account of the higher interest rates would be borne for us not by the present government, but by the government that would come to power in the future. And of course, it's a misnomer to call it government. We have to call it the people of this country, because we have to pay taxes to government in order to enable the government to pay interest over this next, say, the 30-year period. So when the interest rates go up, it affects only the new borrowings.
Right.
And the new borrowings interest have to be paid over the next 30-year period, and all the future governments will have to pay an additional amount, which it would have avoided had they maintained the same interest rate structure at the time they had gone for the first bond scandal that took place in
people are asking me, sending several questions about the budget. This budget, was it prepared by who? By the Minister of Finance with the IMF? Or was it just prepared by the IMF and sent by email to us?
No, Faraz, always when a budget is prepared by somebody, any finance minister, the critics always point out that it's not a budget prepared in-house, it's a budget prepared at the International Monetary Fund. And there's a very good reason for them to make that criticism also, because the line of thinking of the International Monetary Fund as to how a country will have to restructure itself goes in line with the thinking of the local rulers also.
Yeah.
And as a result, now you may remember even during the time of President Mahinda Rajapaksa, when the budget was prepared by Dr. Jayasundara, there was a charge that it had been prepared at the International Monetary Fund.
Did you have anything to do with?
No, nothing to do with it. I mean, International Monetary Fund.
Do you work at the?
Well, of course, when I was in the central bank.
This budget.
No, I don't have anything to do with this budget.
Didn't call you up and say, Doc, can you help me?
No. I was not associated with him, and also, so he doesn't need my services to prepare a budget.
Why not? I mean,
the reason, if you look at the budgetary process of the country, Faraz, the central bank prepares a confidential report in every September of every year, and submits to the government, giving out the basic structure of the budget to be prepared by the Minister of Finance. This report is called the September 15th report, because it is to be presented by the Monetary Board of the Central Bank to the Minister of Finance on or before the 15th of September each year. And that particular document that Central Bank submits will form the basic document which the Central Bank would be using, which the Minister of Finance would be using to prepare his budget. So this is how the budget is prepared. But many critics might say that since the thinking of the IMF and the thinking of the central bank are one and the same, people criticize and say that it's a budget prepared by the IMF.
Several viewers want to know a simple explanation. This beer tax, this tax on beer, is it to appease certain business people, or is it to put right something that was done wrong under the former finance minister, who clearly, beer became more the taxable, the pro rata was more than the liquor taxes.
Well,
and Sri Lanka is probably the only country in the world where that happens.
As far as any tax on alcohol and tobacco is considered in public finance a sin tax. So those are all sinful activities, and in order to dissuade people from undertaking those sins, the government would be imposing higher taxes on them. At the same time, since there is a huge market for alcohol and tobacco, the government can also maximize its revenue.
Yes, I know, but in the charge of the previous finance minister's folly was that he appeared to have given a company owned by a friend, whom by his own admission, a long-standing friendship with the family, they had a implied advantage because he raised the prices of the taxes on beer but maintained the ones on liquor.
But of course now what is happening is that since you cannot avoid people from consuming liquor, and there's a demand for liquor, in order to encourage people to drink soft liquor rather than hard liquor, the tax structure would have been changed. But in my view, far as both measures, whether to tax the hard liquor at a higher rate and soft liquor at a lower rate, they don't serve any purpose, because the liquor and tobacco are addictions. You start, if you want to prevent people from consuming it, you have to adopt some other social measures.
But they make billions of profits.
Yeah, they make billions of profits, and also it's a good industry. It's a highly profitable industry from which the government can collect a huge amount of taxation. I mean, even in Sri Lanka, the single largest industry that would pay the highest amount of taxes to the government of Sri Lanka is the tobacco and the alcohol industry, because they generate about more than 250 billion per annum.
All right, then what about this thing here? You know, if you look at it industry-wise, if you look at the figures, probably the only industries that are showing some sense of profitability would be, by and large, are the telecoms and banking.
Yeah.
And then they go and tax them.
Yeah, you have to. I mean, what matters to us is, you know, rather than taxing the poor people, when it comes to taxation, far as the government will select the easiest and the most profitable way to raise the taxes. And
let's talk about these taxes straight after the break. Time to send you this message. Don't go away. This is Newsline.
Newsfirst, Newsline with Faraz Shaukat Ali.
And welcome back to Newsline, where we're discussing the budget and fiscal management with Dr. W.A. Vijayawardena, the former Deputy Governor of the Central Bank. So back again to these taxes, about taxing profitable sections of the of industry, like the telcos and the banking sector. Doesn't that send the wrong message to investors from abroad?
No,
say, well, every
no,
time it's...
No, Farad, because the two segments of the economy that you had mentioned, there's no necessity for foreigners to come and invest in on those segments, because already those segments are owned by the foreigners. For example, the Ceylon tobacco is owned by the British American tobacco company, and in the banking sector you find half the banks are owned by foreign banks, and therefore there's no necessity for us to do that. Even the telecom sector, the current investments are owned by foreign companies, so except the Sri Lanka Telecom.
But what about this, the banking levies now, this 20 cents per thousand rupees?
In fact, that is actually a misconceived budget proposal for us, and we mentioned about it at the beginning of the discussion also. You may recall even Minister Ravi Karunanayake in his budget for 2016, he also proposed a similar tax on the banking financial transactions at the rate of 50 cents per 1,000 rupee transaction.
That's right.
But that was not implemented because there are all kinds of problems of implementing this particular levy. Reason is, now nobody has defined so far what is meant by a financial transaction. Because if you look at the financial transactions for us, they include the transactions of the government of Sri Lanka, foreign exchange transactions, then the import and export trade transactions, the simply withdrawal of money from banks, and all these transactions.
Because it doesn't seem to be spelled out. What about if I take transfer money from, let's say, a savings account to
that is also account. Financial transaction, banking transaction. So that is why it has it has not been defined properly. Second one is, a bank has also not been defined, because we now today don't talk about commercial bank Farad. We talk about financial services institutions, which includes finance companies, leasing companies. Even now Dialog has become a financial service institution, because it is now
involved so are banks.
Because it is involved in having a local payment system in Sri Lanka called EasyCash. So because of this, the bank, what is meant by a bank has not been defined. Third one is, the biggest problem about the levy that you talk about, for us, is the banks and other financial institutions will have to incur a heavy expenditure to implement the program, because they have to completely revise their computer systems, operational systems, in order to collect this 20 cents from every 1,000 rupee that they are collecting. On top of that, it doesn't earn any additional income to the government, because I saw that the Minister of Finance said that he would give tax credit to banks which are paying this 20 cents. I mean, there's no meaning in that.
So yeah, well, that's a bit, what's the point?
There's no point. I mean, there's no net increase in the revenue as a result of that. I mean, you are
sounds like a bit more red tape.
It's not a red tape. I mean, you are actually imposing an additional inconvenience to banks, customers, even the Inland Revenue Department. So instead of doing that, what they would have done is they would have simply, if they wanted to tax the banking sector in order to generate this revenue to facilitate the repayment of debt, they would have imposed an additional surcharge on the profits of the banks and keep it for about 3 years. That's all.
Now then, apart from cycling, that was a bit of a joke, wasn't it? A bit of humour. And the former president's probably showing off how fit he is at his age. Shouldn't be doing these things anyway. But apart from that, is there a little clue here that the government is considering privatizing the Bank of Ceylon and People's Bank?
No, that in fact, there is actually a history to that, Faraz, and I think we must tell your viewers about that.
They seem to be able to raise debt.
In 2016, the former Minister of Finance, by an order that he has issued under the Finance Act, not under the Inland Revenue Act, but under the Finance Act, he got the state banks, Bank of Ceylon, People's Bank, and also the National Savings Bank, to transfer the entirety of the surplus which they had to the Ministry of Finance. So that he was able to show that he had been a
good Minister
of Finance by increasing the revenue of the government. So as a result, the capital base of this bank got depleted. Now,
because the surplus
was transferred. I mean, whatever that had been accumulated in the banks was transferred back to the Minister of Finance. And Minister of Finance was able to show good results as a minister by raising the revenue, but at the same time there was a huge depletion of capital. So that capital has to be filled now, and in order to fill that capital for us, either the government will have to provide the capital, which means we as taxpayers will have to provide it. Or the government has to raise it from some other source. So what has been suggested now is to issue shares to the employees and the depositors of the bank, so that if they are willing to invest, they might provide capital to the two state banks.
So limited sort of capital.
Limited solution. But for that purpose, the Bank of Ceylon Act ordinance and also the People's Bank Act will have to be amended by the government. So it has to go through Parliament.
I know it appears to be a long way.
It's a long way. I mean,
but when they want to, they can pass things very quickly.
Of course, there can be lots of, opposition, objections by trade unions. So they have to manage the trade unions. They have to manage the opposition. They have to manage.
Do you think they'll go for a proper listing?
You can't. If you want to do that for us, because both the People's Bank Act and the Bank of Ceylon Ordinance, they don't provide for the listing of the shares of these two banks in the stock exchange. So that is why both acts have to be amended in Parliament. So that amendment is a long process.
I see. So but then how in the short term then, if that's not going to be done, in the meantime, what do they do to raise? They
can't accept issuing debentures, because the Bank of Ceylon has already issued debentures, People Bank has issued debentures. Those are called debt capital, not the equity capital. And the debt capital can be raised by issuing debentures so that they can meet the requirement of this Tier 2 capital in terms of the central bank's regulation. But there is a limit to do that also, because...
Do both these banks regularly meet the capital adequacy ratios?
They are. They were deficient in capital adequacy in early 1990s.
That's right.
But now, of course, with the super profits they had made over the last maybe 10-year period, they were maintaining capital adequacy in terms of the regulations of the central bank. But remember, Farah, these two banks are the biggest banks in Sri Lanka, accounting for about half of the total banking business. And at the same time, these banks have lent a huge amount of money to the state sector organizations on a guarantee issued by the government of Sri Lanka. And those guarantees are, though they have been issued by the Minister of Finance, in my view, they have no any meaning. Because the government cannot meet the liability on account of the guarantees, there's a necessity because the government doesn't have money. So in that case, it is always better for them to have a higher capital cushion. Compared to other private banks, they should have a higher capital cushion so that in the event the government is failing to pay, they may be able to meet that particular requirement through the capital that they have inside the bank. So these are issues.
Okay. No Newsline program is complete in this day and age without a question about the bond. All right, so here we go. Now then, as a former central banker yourself, with several years of service in the central bank, and you've obviously followed this story right from the beginning, do you feel that the minister in charge of the subject of the central bank should be subject to cross-examination?
Well, I don't see any necessity because everything that, because one thing for us is the central bank is an independent organization.
Right.
The minister in charge of the subject of the central bank, which is the Minister of Finance, cannot issue directives to central bank, and if the central bank governor and the Monetary Board have followed those directives, they have simply contravened the provisions in the Monetary Law Act.
If they hadn't
if they have followed.
Yeah.
In that case, it is the governor and the Monetary Board which are responsible and not the person who has issued the directives.
Yeah, anyone can issue directives.
Yeah, but they are not supposed to.
Implementation must be via the Monetary Board.
Monetary Law Act. I mean, the act is very clear compared to all other government entities for us.
So whose fault is it?
Fault is the governor and the Monetary Board. If in fact,
the governor and the Monetary
governor and the Monetary Board, because it's the governor and the Monetary Board which have to maintain the independence of the central bank. And in this case, if they have followed any instruction given by either the Minister of Finance or any other...
in this case, the Minister of Finance wasn't even in charge of the subject.
No, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter for us because there is... Many people think that it's the Minister of Finance, since the central bank had been listed under the Ministry of Economic Affairs, the Minister of Finance has no role in... All the acts relating to the banking sector in Sri Lanka
refer to him.
All refer to Minister of Finance by name.
Yes.
It's not any other minister but the Minister of Finance. So as a result, very specific. I mean,
the minister in charge of the subject of finance, the Minister of Finance.
Yeah,
that's how it says.
Yeah, I mean, any other minister has no any role, even though central bank have been gazetted under the Minister of Economic Affairs. No role at all. When it comes to the statutory provisions. So even the Minister of Finance cannot issue directives. And if any directive issued by the Minister of Finance has been complied by the Monetary Board, it's the Monetary Board which is responsible at the end. Because they have simply violated the provisions of the Monetary Law Act.
Are you happy with the progress?
The progress so far, of course, in a way for us, many of the things that we had thought and we had accumulated from the market, we didn't have concrete evidence to prove them. Now, the evidence that had been led before the Presidential Commission has proved everything that we had argued during the last 2-year period.
And if we were to put it simply, it is that this is the beginning of all this was when they departed from established process.
Exactly. I mean, they had done it without proper inquiry, proper analysis and proper studies. Because in the case of central bank, for us, whenever you make a change to the existing policy, always a research paper is submitted by the Department of Economic Research analyzing the merits and the demerits of the proposal.
Right.
And in this particular instance, when the governor decided to do away with this direct placement system and also to do away with the penal interest rate on the deposits which the commercial bank had been maintaining, which had effectively increased the interest rates, and also to do away with the tender procedure.
Yes.
Because there's a tender board appointed by the Monetary Board, and there is no any role for the governor to direct the tender board. You must accept this amount, you must accept this amount at this rate. Those are deviations from the accepted procedures in the central bank, and condoning those deviations had been the beginning of a series of financial scandals that had hit the country subsequently.
And we will no doubt have to pay for that for the next 30 years. But Dr. W. Wijewardena, thank you so much. We've run out of time, but I was going to ask you several more questions about that, including the fact that are there enough rules to try and, like they impose a super gain tax on businesses and so on, the one-off. Pravi Karunaka, as he came in, they imposed a super gains tax, and they said that these were some of them were ill-gotten gains and so on. And so it was a super gain tax. Why can't this government then impose a super gain tax on the primary dealers? And therefore, perpetual treasuries.
No, Faraz. Only one primary dealer had made money.
Yes, I know, but you've got to style it out. You've got to say everybody over 900 million's got to pay.
But you can have something like that.
There's nothing wrong.
Nothing wrong in that case.
Dr. W. Wijewardena, thank you very much. Smashing morning this is. Very good. Thank you. And that's about it from Newsline on Monday. We look forward to having a splendid week ahead, and we wish you the same. Take care. God bless.
News First, Newsline with Faraz Shaukat Ali.